Hey, folks. Today I'm going to be talking about a movie that I've been meaning to do for a while. Well, sort of. I'll explain in a minute. And I decided to move up because we recently had the passing of Bernard Cribbins at the age of 93. So clearly had a very full life. Um, Obviously, for folks who grew up in the UK, they probably knew him from a multitude of things. I know him first and foremost from Doctor Who, where he played Wilfred Mott absolutely beautifully. One of my favorite companions on that show. And yes, I do consider Wilf to be a companion. And then I also know him from the one episode of Faulty Towers that he was in. So that's kind of all I'd seen him in, though. The thing is, Wilfred Mott was not the only time he crossed paths with Doctor Who. Because the things I've been meaning to get around to for a bit are the odd 1960s full-color Doctor Who movies starring Peter Cushing as Doctor Who. Like, that's actually his name. And he's human. He's not an alien, but he still invented a time machine and travels through time and space. They're weird. Like, just conceptually, they're odd. Now, in an ideal world, I would be talking about the first one of these. However, that one doesn't feature Bernard Cribbins. The second one, Dalek's Invasion of Earth 2150, does include him. And so that is the one that I took a look at and I'm going to talk about today. Now, as much as I would love this to just be a tribute to Bernard Cribbins, I think if I tried to do that exclusively, first of all, I'd probably break down a little bit. But beyond that, I have the rest of the movie to talk about. But this is my way of doing something to acknowledge his passing other than watching compilations of things he was in at home and quietly crying. So, moving on. This movie, it is a sequel. So, I don't know. There's a ton of stuff that just isn't really established. And I don't know how much of that is dependent on the fact that maybe it was better established in the first movie. I'm going to presume that it is, but also given the way this thing is presented, maybe not. So, like, for example, the Doctor himself doesn't really get established. He's just kind of there doing his thing. Honestly, a bit like a standard episode of Doctor Who. So I suppose it's representative in that way. But at the same time, like, I would have expected a little more prep for a movie audience. But again, maybe that happened in the first one. So this one is largely and fairly closely to my memory based off Dalek Invasion of Earth, which is a First Doctor story that I have seen and do like. It's one of the ones for the First Doctor that I like the most. It's kind of that and the Time Meddler right now for me as being Hartnell's best ones. Now, it's been long enough since I've seen the William Hartnell Dalek Invasion of Earth that I couldn't tell you exactly how many things have been changed or added. So I'm going off of memory, and it's possible that some of the things that I'm going to point out might have actually been in the original version. I'm just not remembering. You don't have to tell me. I'm just taking it as a given, because at this point it's been long enough that like only kind of the major beats stand out to me in that original version at this point. So this is not going to be a thorough breakdown of differences. In terms of Peter Cushing's Doctor, like the main trait they seem to be going with him is sort of unflappable. He just is largely unfazed by pretty much everything going on, which makes him in some ways a rather interesting contrast to the Doctors who had been established by that point. Because obviously Hartnell, was very intellectual, but also was frequently concerned, especially early on. He often wanted them to get out of the situations that they were in. It's sort of developing more of a, I'm going to stay and deal with this mentality as time went on. And then by the time this came out, Troughton either would have just started or was about to. And he obviously, like, running away is his first instinct on, like, everything. So to have a Doctor who just doesn't seem that bothered or that worried by what's going on, So, like, just as an example, he's working on getting to these mines, and he's got a guy with him. And the doctor is, I know he's called Foley Doctor in this. I'm still going to call him the doctor. The doctor is like, so we've got about 3 miles, and then this minion sort of grunt like shoots at them, and the guy who's with the doctor shoots him back, and the doctor's just like, so as I was saying, like, just it's like, boy, that was an annoying interruption. Moving on, and it's an interesting choice, and it makes him fairly distinct from most of the other doctors. Not to say that the doctor can never be unflappable, but it's usually only in situations where it turns out he was in full control the whole time and maybe wasn't letting on about that. But here, like, he's not, and yet he still has that attitude. So it's kind of interesting as a character trait. It's my first taste of the Peter Cushing Doctor, so it's sort of interesting to sort of get that as the thing to latch onto to sort of get him. The companions are it's a little funny. So Susan is here. Susan is an actual child. So Susan in the original, was talked about as a child and was obviously the youngest one there, but like, she was in her later teens, at least in terms of to look at her and most of her behavior. This one's like a legitimate kid, which is strange and makes her performance, unfortunately, a little bit flat just because child actor. And, unfortunately, the original version of Susan was often not given a lot to do aside from run and scream. But, she did the most she could with it. And this kid just doesn't have a lot to bring. The doctor also has a niece, which, at least looking at the Wikipedia, was not introduced in the previous one. So she's just new out of nowhere here. There's no Ian or Barbara. Like, what it seems like is instead of having Ian and Barbara, who were in the previous Doctor Who movie thing, they replaced them effectively with the niece and Bernard Cribbins' character, Thomas, who is the way he ends up on the TARDIS is so weird. He's a constable, and he witnesses a robbery. He's trying to chase down the people who did it, sees the police box, goes into it, I guess presumably to try and call for help or something along those lines, and it just happens to be the TARDIS right as the TARDIS leaves, and so suddenly he's in 2150 with the rest of them. So he's kind of not given that much of a chance to be characterized or even like wrap his head around what's going on. He's just kind of going like, well, this is nuts. And then, sees what's going on. Like, okay, I guess that is what's going on. Okay. And he's got to kind of roll with it. I suspect they were largely leaning on Bernard Cribbins' just ability to project a great amount of personality just as a performer to kind of carry a lot of the weight. And for the most part, it does work. But some of the things that center around him bring me to one of the other odd things about this movie. So, like, there are a number of things that you can tell very clearly were done, like, because it's a movie, and ways to distinguish it from just being the same story as was on TV, but in color. Even though that would have been enough, given that at this point in time, reruns weren't really a thing. So, it's not like people were going to do an immediate comparison anyways. But there are some notable changes other than just like the superficial ones of Ian and Barbara being replaced by two characters who effectively fill the same roles, and, the Doctor technically now being human. Beyond that, there are things like the budget. You can tell when the budget is like being stretched a bit, but you can tell they had some money for some stuff, especially some of the there are some serious explosions in this thing. And things like the Dalek saucer, that's pretty decent effects work as far as the standards of the time went. So there's stuff like that, higher production value and things of that nature. There's also the music, which is, first of all, it's a heck of a lot more intrusive than Doctor Who music tends to be. It's also very jazzy. It's like they're trying to do a James Bond style music to it. It's very weird. I'm not going to say it doesn't work, but like it adds a much different vibe. So like Doctor Who on TV, even like Doctor Who could be campy. But that was usually just an offshoot of, its limited budget and resources and having much bigger ideas than that. But usually most of the time the stuff was played pretty straight, and anything where characters were in danger was treated with a certain amount of seriousness. Here you've got the jazzy music plays and like, yeah, we're going on an adventure. Whoo! It's a weird vibe. Again, largely by comparison. The other thing though, in this one, there's a oddly comedic tone, but it's not just across the whole thing. Like there's a certain lightness brought about by things like the music choices, but like there's overtly comedic stuff. One of the first things that happens, there's this random guy, it's just some walk-on part, who he goes to like try and open the police box just as it disappears, and he ends up falling on the ground, and he's like, ugh. And then he does a take to camera, sort of like, boy, ain't that something? And I was like, wait, what? And there's weird comedic moments like this. There's an extended bit with Bernard Cribbins, who's pretending to be one of the Robo-Men. Those are the guys who have been brainwashed to work as Dalek servants. There's this rather extended bit where he's trying to pretend to be one of them, and it goes on for a while with him being slightly out of sync with their highly synchronized movements and trying to be like watch out of the corner of his eye for what he's supposed to do. And it's not unentertaining, but it feels like a sketch from a show that's doing a parody of Doctor Who. So it's odd, and I like, without having the first one to compare to know whether or not these kinds of weird comedic beats were in the previous movie. Not knowing that, I have to wonder, did they add these things in because Bernard Cribbins is good at doing this kind of comedic stuff? Because he is pretty good at it. And for what it is, it's decently executed. But like, why is it here? And it's especially weird because it's not like they had to bulk out the story. The original Dalek Invasion of Earth was a 6-parter. So, that's over 2 hours worth of stuff. And this movie is about an hour 20. And yet there's stuff like these comedic beats, which is the kind of things that normally, if it was in there, I'd assume they were running short and they needed filler, but they didn't need filler. They had more than enough material. So it's odd. But, for the purposes of appreciating Bernard Cribbins, I know UK people get kind of on me about the way I pronounce his name. I know in the UK it's pronounced more Bernard, and like I'm American, so we say Bernard. And apologies. So please don't yell at me in the comments. I'm doing my best. But he is very good in those comedic bits. And like towards the end, he just has this wonderful triumphant moment that's great. He is able to, fill sort of the Ian Chesterton role of being the more physical aspect of the hero, where the Doctor is the mental. And he is able to do that, but he's just a bit more lovable than Ian Chesterton ever was. Thomas is a lovable, affable character in a way that Bernard Cribbins is able to just bring with his presence, because he can just do that. And I'm not sure I have too much else to add. This is a weird viewing experience, and probably made weirder by the unforced error of me choosing to not back to back the first one and then this, and just do this one on its own. If I'd seen the first one first, because that makes sense, doesn't it? See the first one first. If I'd actually done that, maybe some of these choices would have been less of a surprise to me, but also I don't know. But this was the one I wanted to take a look at. And it's an interesting oddity. I'm going to have to check out the other one at some point, because like now that I've seen him, I'm going to have to add Peter Cushing in to any future Doctor rankings that I do. I also need to rewatch Scream of the Shalka, because I really should add in that Doctor, even though it's non-canon. That doesn't mean I'm going to go through like all Big Finish Unbound and deal with those Doctors before I do another ranking. I'm just rambling at this point. That's the point at which I should be wrapping up. Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150. Have you seen it? It's an odd piece. If you have seen it, what'd you think about it? Have you seen the other one? Is this in keeping with it, tone and presentation-wise? Is this a little different? Whatever hints you want to give me on that, I'll take them. But whatever your other thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon's what pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Any amount you can contribute helps, but even if you can't do that, like, share, subscribe, they all help. But don't worry too much about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break. Now my thanks to my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Karak, The Thing That Goes Doink in the Anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Udelki, The Oath of Boy, Bernabilax the Poodle, Zach, Idolin, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Bookworm, Adam, RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Jay Gorley, Brendan LaRose, and TT. If you want to hear me possibly butcher your name, check out the rewards on the Patreon. And thanks to all you folks.